Welcome once again to Everyday Holiness, a Faith Indie podcast brought to you by the Notre Dame Alumni Association. This is again your host, Dan Allen, Associate Director of Spirituality and Service, and we're pleased to have you with us. I'm honored to be joined today by Father Joe Carey. Father Joe is a Holy Cross priest, and he works here on campus. He's a 1962 graduate of Notre Dame, and he's done a lot of different ministries, but currently he's the chaplain to the ACE program and in residence in Ryan Hall, correct?
Correct.
Great. Well, welcome to the podcast, Father Joe.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Thanks for taking time. We're talking in the summer here. It's a busy time for the ACE program, so appreciate you coming in today. We start at your beginnings. What are some of your early memories of your upbringing that you still carry with you?
Well, one of the things I have is 3 pictures in my office of 3 churches. And that's a story of my sacramental life, but also of where I've lived. Mm-hmm. And so the first picture is a church, Blessed Sacrament, in Jackson Heights, New York, in the borough of Queens. And that's where I was born. Mm-hmm. But that church was where I was baptized. So a friend had been there visiting, and her aunt happened to have lived in that parish. So she took a picture. Then she knew that I had grown up in Detroit, and I was in a parish called Jesu, and it had a school. It was a school that was heavily influenced by the IHM sisters, mm-hmm. and the parish was a Jesuit parish. So so at Jesu I made my first communion, first reconciliation, and confirmation.
Okay. And
then the third church is a basilica, mm-hmm. which is where I was ordained a priest. Mm-hmm. So my life from New York, we lived there 5 years, then moved to Detroit because my dad's job changed, and then coming to Notre Dame. And one of the things, I grew up with 3 sisters, so okay. I learned a lot. No brothers, so
okay.
I was.
It prepared you for a women's residence hall.
Right, it sure did.
And what do you remember about your parents, or your sisters, any of your extended family, in terms of sharing their faith with you and how that took root in your life?
Well, one of the things was that my father prayed every night before he went to bed. And we would always, we'd go into their room, and he might be praying. He was a Notre Dame graduate also, and mm-hmm. loved Notre Dame a lot. And so he had a simple faith. He prayed, and he was influenced by his mother, who, after my grandfather died, moved from upstate New York to Detroit to live with us. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother had this devotion to the Infant of Prague, and she would do this devotion. And she had the statue in our dining room, and so you'd see her several times during the day praying. And that always was an impact. And I think the Jesuits had a great, powerful impact on my spirituality, because I liked the Jesuits a lot, and I always, in high school, I learned about St. Ignatius and finding God in all things. Mm-hmm. So I learned about that at a young age, and the Jesuits also wanted me to join them.
I'm sure, yeah.
After high school, but because my dad had gone to Notre Dame, I always wanted to come here.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I was going to ask that. You had these Jesuits who seemed to be models and mentors to you. Were thoughts of the priesthood percolating then, and Jesuits versus coming to Notre Dame? Did you know much about Holy Cross? Well, take us through that.
I knew a lot about Holy Cross from my father. Had a classmate who they became great friends, and he, after about 10 years in business, joined Holy Cross. And his name is Father Jerry Wilson. Okay. And he was a vice president of business affairs. So he worked closely with Father Ted and Father Ned. And he would come and visit us at our house. And to me, that was the most amazing thing, that a priest came to our house and actually slept in a bed and did the dishes after the meal and things like that.
A real person.
That's what he came. He was just a great priest, holy man, probably the holiest person I've ever met. And so he was always a mentor for me. But in high school, I just resisted. I just knew that I wanted to go to Notre Dame, and in fact, it's the only school I ever applied to. And when I got here, I remember people talking about where else they applied to, and I said, just here. And they said, what would you have done if you didn't get in? I said, I never thought about it.
It was divinely ordained.
Right, yeah. But so like Father Wilson, when I was at Notre Dame, there was a priest, Father Dan O'Neill, who was, he had a job of being chaplain to the freshmen, our freshman year. And he just was so welcoming and so wanting everyone to adjust and was there for everyone. And then back to my mother, I should have brought up that she was very hospitable. And we had relatives who would come to Detroit to go to college. Two of my cousins went to Marygrove College in Detroit, and then another one went to the University of Detroit. So there are always people there. And I think that sense of hospitality was really important. And that's something that's guided me my whole life.
Yeah, so many years, of course, we'll hear about in residential life and continuing that spirit of welcoming people to our campus. So Notre Dame was quite a bit different when you first arrived than it is
all
today.
Men.
Yeah, all men. So give us a sense of what you remember of those days in Notre Dame.
Well, the freshman year, we could stay out till midnight twice a week, and the rest of the time you had to be in by 10 or 11. They turned off the electricity, so you were supposed to go to bed, but some people would take a candle from the grotto and study by candlelight. So it was very strict, and my rector my freshman year, I thought he was being hospitable at first, but because he'd always be by the sign-in desk around midnight.
Right.
But what he was there for was to see who had been drinking. So I was always afraid to break any rules but I also remember just the friendships that I made. And in fact, there was Dick Musial was a guy that was in my class, and we lived in the same hall. And one day, it was in the paper that his father, Stan Musial, had signed a new contract with the St. Louis Cardinals,
right?
And they said he was making about $1 million or $100,000, and everyone said, "Boy, that guy's really rich," And I also, my father's stories from Notre Dame were instrumental in my love for it. In fact, he saw New Rockney the day before he left for the plane, on the plane which crashed.
Right.
And so he was a junior that year. And so he experienced that.
Yeah.
And
Rockney's funeral and the alma mater for the first time.
Right, all that.
Wow. That's living history,
So my father had this sense of Notre Dame that was above what most people ever think about, and that was rubbed off on me.
Yeah, it gets in your blood that way. So you talked about resisting the idea of priesthood for a little bit. Was it during your time at Notre Dame where that finally broke and said, I really need to take a real look at this?
Yeah, it was my junior year, and I was an accounting major, and I didn't like it. And I couldn't get out of it because I was too far in. But so I began thinking about it, and then I thought Father Wilson's office was in the main building on the third floor. And anytime I wanted to talk to him, walk over there and look up to see if his light was on. And he worked a lot at night, so I would go up there and talk to him. So he was the first person I said, I think I want to be a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And so like he kind of guided me through that process. And so then he really helped me a lot to discern that, to see what do I want. And so I made that decision through his guidance and a lot of prayer. And so then I entered after my senior year.
Okay.
And then we went to, the novitiate was in Minnesota then. Mm-hmm. And then because I was an accounting major, after the novitiate, I came back to Notre Dame and just took some courses in philosophy and Latin.
Sure.
and then went to Washington, D.C. But it was a couple years ago, my sister discovered one of my nephews had a trunk with a lot of pictures and letters that my sisters and I had sent to our parents. Mm. And so she discovered one letter which was really significant for me. And that was the fact that I was telling them that I had made the decision to take final vows. Mm-hmm. We didn't have cell phones. Right. We had to write a long letter that I was committed to being ordained in a year. And so I also talked about, while we were in Washington, some of us, and a priest, Father Bill Toohey, who was a campus minister here, but at the time he was with us in teaching homiletics at Holy Cross College. And so we would go out to a all-girls school, Holy Cross Academy, once a week on Friday, and it was run by the Holy Cross Sisters. And so we would go and we would run small group discussions for the religion classes. There were about 4 of us. Mm-hmm. And we had done a retreat with them. And so I said, in this letter I wrote, and I was able to see it, I still look at it every once in a while, because I said, I think what I want to do as a priest is to work with young adults. Mm-hmm. And I've done that for 56 years. Right. So, yes. So it just kind of let me see where I was thinking. Mm-hmm. In 1967, mm-hmm. and then to be able to say, wow, this has been something to see this life unfold.
Yeah. Well, it's so amazing. I think sometimes when you're in the midst of it, there's these whispers of God's will in your life, and you maybe don't realize how significant they are, or these little movements of your heart. But then as it plays out over a course of a life, it was like, oh my gosh, like the beginnings, the seeds were being planted even at that time.
Absolutely, and that's what's really, it was great seeing it 2 years ago for the first time since I wrote it. Right. I didn't even remember writing it.
Right, yeah, what a gift.
And just to see that God knew that everything seemed to be like to come to Notre Dame, where I got to meet other Holy Cross priests other than Father Wilson, mm-hmm. and to be inspired by Father Hesburgh and Father Joyce. And there was a priest here, Father Joe Barry was his name, and he had at one time had been a chaplain in the Army, but he was the best confessor ever to go to. He just exuded God's love to us. Mm-hmm. And so all these people, and a lot of prayer, but I look to the examples of a lot of people, and then especially Father Wilson.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely touch on that, some of the people who have guided you along the way, and I'd love to hear about those. Your family's reaction to your decision to go through with it, so to speak, to take final vows, become ordained. Close family and friends, was everyone excited about that? Did anybody have reservations?
Everyone was excited about it. In fact, it meant a lot to my family, and the support of them was really special. And I think that was something that every time my father saw me say Mass, he cried. Mm. So that was very I mean, everyone would tell me, like when I would go home and I'd do something at our parish or my parents' parish, someone would say, your dad just is so connected to it and is so proud. And so there was no one who said, are you sure? Even looking back when I was in high school, the things I did, I joined a group called the Sodality. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know what it was for, but someone said this is a good thing, but it taught us how to pray. It was a kind of each year you do something different and go on retreat to a Jesuit retreat center, and so those were little things along the way, and they all built up, and I can look back and see, wow. And in those, I always get back to those three pictures, and that so much of my life, and especially at Jesuit Parish, where I went through from first grade through 8th, and then the Jesuit high school was a mile away, and just seeing in our parish, it was so everyone was so connected. Everyone went to the school, and the parish was a central place. And I think that was also the culture of our faith life.
Yeah, very fertile ground there for something like a priestly vocation. One of the things I love watching at ordinations are the families of the young men, and I love sort of imagining what all those different stories, but to see if both parents are still living, to see on their faces, I mean, they've given this gift of faith, and now it's a gift back to them to have a son who's a priest. My uncle is a Capuchin Franciscan priest, and I saw that in my grandparents, that was a gift their whole life to have a son, even to say their funerals, that he had been a gift to them. So that's such a beautiful sentiment. As you got into priestly ministry, what were some of your early things that you were asked to do?
Well, the first thing was to go to Niles, Illinois, to teach at we had a high school there, all-boys Catholic high school, Notre Dame High School, and it was something I tell the ACE teachers. I went off to teach because I was asked to do it by the provincial.
The vow of obedience.
Right? And when I raised a question, but I don't know anything about teaching and education, they said everyone learns from the priests. So there were about 20 priests at the school, or 25 of us. And so you did learn just and you made a lot of mistakes, but you learned. And that was a pretty neat thing of the support of the community that really mattered. And teaching high school is a very difficult thing because you got to be on every single day, all day long. And
any sign of weakness, they'll exploit, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, but so I loved teaching there. And then I was asked to become vocation director for the congregation. And so I did that. And so I suggested that the vocation director shouldn't have to live at the seminary, but should live in a hall. And it took 2 years for anyone to say yes to that. But so then I got involved in Dillon Hall. I was assistant rector at first, and then became rector. And so everything I did there were challenges, but there were so many blessings. And I always thought I wanted to be a rector, but I never thought before it. There's discipline involved. If you're going to be with 18 to 22-year-old men, and then there's going to be some challenges.
Sure.
And there were, of having to learn how to do discipline in a very fair and kind way, but still delivering a message. And so that was, I even began to realize that the word discipline comes from disciple. And that this was inviting people into examine their lives and see what they might need to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have these conversations every Sunday night in Dillon because a lot of action. There were 340 people,
right?
and
on Saturday night,
and Friday and Saturday
mm-hmm.
night. But I didn't want to be someone who would be yelling at people.
Mm-hmm.
I had learned from high school that doesn't work. Teaching in high school, you have to be firm, but you can be kind at
mm-hmm.
the same time. And I think that I'd always think of Father Hesburgh's prayer, "Come Holy Spirit," before I'd have these meetings
mm-hmm. on
Sunday night. And how I had remembered the prefect of discipline when I was a student was this Holy Cross priest, Father Leonard Collins. And so if you got in trouble or if you wanted to get excused from class the day before a vacation, if you cut a class, it was a triple cut. So you needed to get permission if you wanted to have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the one time I went to see him. It was I could get a ride home as opposed to taking the train home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was a pretty good reason. So what I didn't know was that Father Collins, you'd walk into his office and he'd be smoking a cigarette. And he'd look at you and he'd say, "What?" And then you had to start talking, And then I said, "I want to ask if I could be excused from these 2 classes before Thanksgiving, the day before, whenever we went off for Thanksgiving." He just sat there and took a puff, and then he said, "No." So I had to take the train home.
That was that.
But I was thinking, and it was the same day I had turned in my application to Holy Cross.
What am I getting into here?
I said, "Don't you know I'm joining you?"
Right.
At least I think I am. Or maybe I don't want to.
Maybe I'm having second thoughts right now.
No, but learning that vow of obedience
mm-hmm.
Was also important, because you could ask to do something and you could get a quick answer, no,
mm-hmm.
and then you had to do something else. Like I actually wanted to stay, instead of going to Niles, I wanted to stay and teach at St. Joe High School because I'd been a deacon there for 1 year and I loved it. And so then when I asked to do that, I was told, "No, you'll go to Notre Dame High School." So that's how it went in those days.
Right.
And so like you had this acceptance that this is God's will, and that's how it came across, that the provincial or the superior is speaking and you have to say yes.
Yeah. I've heard, talking to other priests and religious, that is one of the challenging aspects of entering into that life is your will is not completely your own. There's often a superior who's guiding that. You also lived through Vatican II and post-Vatican II and a lot of those changes. What do you remember about all that?
Well, I was in Washington, D.C. for theology when Vatican II started.
Buckle up, right?
So, and we had some great professors who kind of guided us through it. And there weren't any that were teaching us that were against it.
Mm-hmm.
So that really helped.
Right.
And it would be like other ideas would be coming up. And so it was just challenging all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want to become a priest. Mass wasn't the reason, wasn't part of my thinking process when I was entering.
Right.
Because I didn't understand the Mass. It was in Latin, and it was just foreign. And we would go to Mass and have these prayer books. One side would be the Latin and the other side would be the English. You're just reading along, each person, or those who were at least attempting to know what was happening. But as it unfolded over those years and seeing how the Mass could be inclusive and getting the community to really participate, I thought that was really important. Like, my ordination at Sacred Heart in 1969 was the first Holy Cross ordination in English.
Okay.
And so that was pretty neat.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Moose Krause, who was a longtime
Sure.
AD here.
Right.
He had a son, Ed Jr., who became a Holy Cross priest a few years earlier, and he was ordained in Rome, where he was studying. And so Moose Krause had been at his son's ordination, but didn't understand anything. And then when he came to mine, I can remember talking to him afterwards, because he was a friend of my father's, and he just said, I'm just overwhelmed by what happened in this ordination, and it just so struck him. But it was in English, and the bishop who ordained us was a Holy Cross bishop who had been a missionary, and was really made it warm and powerful, and you felt God enclosing all of us. And
Yeah, it reminds me of the recent feeling I've had with our new Pope, Pope Leo. It's such a mind-bending experience to hear him speak in English,
right,
in just a regular way, no accent. No, the Pope always felt at least one or two languages away.
Yeah.
And here's this Pope who's speaking like a Chicagoan,
like a Sox fan.
Right, yeah. And it's just sort of like, oh my gosh, it makes you feel closer to him. And I'm sure that was the feeling of these masses, that you understood so much more what was happening, and your mind could enter into it more fully because it was in the vernacular.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what a gift that was to our church, and it sounds like did it help get you more excited about the liturgical life and saying Mass?
Absolutely, yeah. And an interesting thing that happened, it was a couple months or maybe 5 months before my ordination, and this friend who had been in the seminary called me up, and he said, when are you getting ordained? And I said, April 12th. And he said, will you do your first Mass on April 19th? And I said, I hadn't even thought about it.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, that's when I'll do it. And then he said his fiancée, Beverly, and he would like me to do their wedding on April 26th.
Okay.
So 2 weeks in, I had my first wedding.
That started early for you too.
Right, yeah.
I know you've done a lot.
Yeah,
so
but the beauty of the liturgy and bringing people to know Christ, connecting their lives to Christ, was what I think is really important.
And I know in every priest's life there are hard moments and hard days and difficult things that you enter into the messiness of people's lives too. What have been some of those hard moments where you've had to really rely on your vows, really had to rely on your faith to help you through it as a priest?
Well, probably the death of my sister. I had a sister who died when she was 39. And the thought was, I never thought that I wouldn't do her funeral, but that was really hard.
Yeah.
And then my parents, I presided and preached at their funerals too. But it was a sense that when my sister died and when my father had been involved with a group of nuns at an orphanage and supporting them and everything. But when my sister died, they called up my father and said, we can help you in putting the liturgy together. And so we all met together. And so it's a sense of the community coming forth and providing support in that matter. I think then there's also the challenges of the loneliness you can feel like walking into a wedding reception. And if you only know a couple people, then that's sort of awkward. Those times of where you realize I'm alone amidst people.
Right.
so I think about that a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I think those have been really struggles,
Mm-hmm.
and I think of times where my friends left the priesthood, or I can remember when I was first ordained, a close friend who had been at Moreau and then in Washington. He was in the Anglo-Canadian province, but I went to his ordination a few months later, and it was the realization that we may never see each other again. And we didn't for several years, so you have these friendships, and then you go separate ways. And so sometimes people leaving the priesthood, that's been painful, or people getting into trouble and trying to help them when you don't even know what to do.
Yeah.
Those are the hard times. And being able to, I think one of the things I learned when my father died, he had had surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. And the surgery went well. It was heart surgery, but his kidneys started to fail. So he was there a long time, 8 weeks. And so my mom and I were there when he died. And I just remembered being so helpless. And I'm supposed to be the priest who can do something.
Fix things, right? Yeah.
And so my father's favorite, so we had to wait for someone from the hospital to get everything so that he could get back to Detroit and everything. All these details that you don't even think about. But I remember sitting there with my mother, and then this nurse who my father really liked, she came to the room we were in, and she just sat between us and held both our hands. And we didn't say much, but there was a feeling of connection, and that was a beautiful moment, something that those sort of things have been really hard. And another time I had to take a kid who was in Dillon. I got a call in the middle of the night that his father was very sick, and would I bring him to the hospital in Goshen? We're riding along, and I'm thinking, there's something really bad that's happened. It's not just sick. So I said, I better know the way back,
Yeah.
And so so we got there, and his father had died. And I was with that family for a while and everything, and just to be with them. And he had a little brother at the time who might have been 12 years old. And then, that kid, his little brother, he got into Notre Dame several years later. And so it was a Good Friday, and my mother had been at Holy Cross Care and Rehabilitation Center here for a couple of years, actually. So when she died on a Good Friday. And so then I was back in my room in Dillon, and I was calling my sisters, and then there was a knock at the door, and it was this kid who was 12 when his father died.
Right.
He knocked on my door, and I said, come in, and he says, what time is service at the Basilica today? And I looked at him and I said, you know what, it's really amazing. You just walked in. My mother just died a half hour ago. And he looked at me and he said, you were there for us, and I'm glad I can be here for you.
Wow.
So that was a challenging moment, but just a holy moment, and just a significance of that really struck me and still does.
Yeah, I know. I've got chills hearing that story and all those stories, really, but I think it's another instance of that even in our loneliness, even in our darkness, God sends us bits of hope and bits of light, and we cling to those things during those times. I do want to turn to this kind of special ministry that you've said so many weddings
Right.
over the course of your priesthood.
Yeah.
Did that come about organically? Just you eventually moved into halls with, you were in residence with women's halls, and did that just keep coming about?
Dillon Hall.
Men and Dillon, and then women. Yeah, so.
And then I'm also the chaplain of the women's lacrosse team, and I
Okay.
got ace and all that.
So what is it about you that people say, oh, I want Father Joe to preside at my wedding?
I think that they feel like they know me. That might be what it is. Some people say that everyone feels like I'm their best friend, and, and so it just comes about, and like it's. First of all, I love doing weddings and preparing people for them, and I try to make everyone's homily personal.
Yeah, challenge. Right? Yeah,
It's always a challenge.
Yeah. Oh, we're reading from Corinthians again, I see. Yeah.
So a couple weeks ago, I had a wedding. The woman was a ACE graduate. She and her husband now both graduated from Notre Dame as undergrads. But so I asked them, how did you meet? Because you could be on this Notre Dame campus and never meet someone.
Right.
So they said that their sophomore year they were going to be in the Compass program as mentors, and people did it as in pairs. And so at that year for their orientation, you got in your packet for the orientation you got a word, and you had to find a complementary word. And so this woman, Colleen, said her word was jelly, and the guy she married was peanut butter. It was peanut butter and jelly.
That's great.
And so I just thought that was so unique. So no one else will ever get a peanut butter and jelly homily. But to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it's good.
Right.
You both have to contribute. There's not one. If it's just peanut butter, right, it's not a P&J sandwich. Right. And so another time I had a pizza one because the bride was from Chicago and the groom was from New York.
Okay.
And it turned out, they said afterwards, pizza's the only thing they argue about. Just people will tell me things, and then I get the inspiration comes from praying about it then, or even dreaming about it. And one wedding, I dreamt that the night before the wedding, I had a dream about this couple, that they had gone shopping at Sam's Club. I mean, that came out in the dream, and that they got this stuff and it was in their car and they went somewhere else, and someone broke in and stole everything. But in the dream, they said, we could be really upset, but someone must have needed it more than we did. That was but that kind of described their personalities and how they treat people. And so I find weddings is the opportunity to really bring people to come to know their faith. I think a lot of people, either through a wedding or the baptism of their children, learn that how they become more on fire on living their faith.
Yeah.
And I like that. And that's why I'm really enthusiastic about it. And so it's just a kind of the history of relationships and knowing people and talking to people and trying to be hospitable and things like that.
Yeah. And a natural fit, and so many people have thought so as well. You've been a priest for so many years and doing these weddings. You've also been a part of these families' stories over the course of time and seen them have kids and go through difficulties and seen their marriage develop and flourish or not. Tell us about what it's been like you were there at the beginning, so to speak, sacramentally with their wedding, and then seeing them live their life over time?
Well, I remember this one wedding where the bride was from St. Mary's and the groom was from Notre Dame. And I remember seeing how much they both grew in their faith, and they had 4 daughters, and I baptized 3 of their daughters, and I also did 3 of their weddings. So, like, he calls me their family priest. And I've gone to a funeral of his brother-in-law and his father-in-law, and so you become close, and people count on you in their challenging times, and just being present and listening to people and knowing that they just need someone to connect with. I also have the luxury of seen Dillon guys bring their daughters to live in Ryan Hall.
Yeah.
And that's really, they all grow up and they become mature human beings.
Somehow, some way.
Yeah, it just happens. And so I think that's the beauty of it. And I always tell young rectors, Holy Cross rectors, it may seem like the end of the world some days in your job.
Right.
But there's a growth in just knowing that your presence in their lives matters. I think that's why I say yes to people. I had one weekend on weddings where I did 3.
Oh, wow.
And it was a tough one to keep people straight.
Right.
Another time I had a wedding where the bride's name was Rebecca, and I called her Rachel. When she came on behalf of Charlie and Rachel, I want to welcome you to their wedding, and if looks could kill, I would have been dead. And so then when I started the homily, I said, Rebecca, we're going to change your last name today, not your first, and everyone laughed.
Right.
It was something that was a momentary. I knew her.
Right, yeah, it's a human moment, brain lapse, yeah. Yeah, well, I'm sure that, it's a little bit different than, like, you grow up in a parish, and a parish priest, you're sort of, you're there for several years or the life, over the course of time, and you see people, but you've been relatively stable here at Notre Dame for many years, but people keep coming and going and coming and back, and those relationships remain, but they're tethered because people go away and come back. So I think it's a bit of a unique existence as a priest to experience some of what you have.
Right, yeah. When you're not in a parish, people are selecting you, and it's a beautiful thing.
Well, I know that I've heard so many stories of you being a gift to many people. As I said, like, you were a gift to your parents as a young priest and giving back to them, but you've given back to so many others. You've also have this aspect of your life, this chaplain to the ACE program. You talked about the sort of deer in the headlights teaching right after ordination. How did you get involved in ACE, and what's your role there?
Well, I got involved in ACE because the founder, Father Tim Scully, asked me.
Yeah.
At the time, I was the interim director of campus ministry. Were you an intern then? Or?
I was just a little bit before that with Father Warner. But
okay, that was, so I had been working for campus ministry, and then when he got elected general, I was interim director.
Right.
Well, being an interim anything is a tough situation.
Right.
That might have been the hardest, getting back to a hard thing, because like I did it for a year and then was asked, well, will you do it for another year?
Yeah. Because
they didn't have anyone lined up, I guess. It was May, and I said, I don't know what they'll do if I say no.
Right.
But so for the second year I did it. But Tim Scully said to me in December, when this ends, I want you to come to ACE and be. He had ideas, but not always exactly what it would be.
Yeah.
And I kept on wondering what I was going to do, and the title chaplain is you don't even know what that means. Say Mass, I figured that out.
Sure.
But also I figured out it meant being involved with the ACE teachers as much as I could, to travel, to help with communities. So I would go to Oklahoma City and Tulsa and once a semester and meet with the ACE teachers. There are 4 or 5 in a community, and just check in with them and help them see how they can grow as teachers. Our 3 pillars are teaching, community life, and spirituality. And so some want to focus on teaching, some want to focus on community, a few want to focus on spirituality, and it's to try to balance them and see how they are connected rather than just, now I'm doing, I'll go to Mass on Sunday, but how is your classroom culture? What are you creating? Would anyone know the way you treat your students and care for them? You see this sacred bond of being a teacher, that people bring their kid to school, the most sacred thing they have, trusting you. And are you realizing that? And sometimes you have to be reminding people, and so I help select and interview people, and I help on just letting people know about ACE and talking about ACE, and it's interesting to talk to people, young people, and say, have you ever considered this? And so it's a lot of just conversations with people. And
yeah, I would imagine it's a lot of discernment, because the way the program is structured, they're coming out of undergraduate most times, and is this a way station where I'm going to go to school for a couple of years and teach for a couple of years, or is this my sort of more full-time vocation? Am I going to continue teaching beyond this, or am I going to go into some other aspect of life? And I feel like the people I've known who've gone through the program, like, it's full-time discernment for a couple of years in the midst of the kind of the chaos of learning how to be a teacher for the first time. So I'm sure you're such a resource to so many people as they sort all that out.
Yeah, that's what I try to do, and get to know them really well. So like when they're here, like this summer, the first years are here for 8 weeks and the second years for 7. So during this time, being able to eat with them in the dining hall, have one-on-one meetings, share a meal with them, and sometimes they have contests, and the prize is I'll take them to Rocco's.
And be competitive then.
Right. So, but just helping them to understand and feel connected to each other, feel connected to God. I think a lot of what it is helping them, asking the question, where is God? And you had a miserable day today teaching because this student threw himself down on the ground and was crying, and all these things that can go on, sometimes with the little ones or with bullying with others, and all the challenges that a teacher faces. But I think to help them then to see, well, what can you learn from this today? And I talk a lot about our mistakes can be our best teachers, and how you can change and turn things around.
Well, I'm sure that's a message that is helpful for them to hear when it probably feels a bit bewildering, especially in those early weeks and months. I'd like to turn finally to holiness, because that's the theme overall, and we've talked about a lot of the people who have served as mentors to you in holiness. Who are some of the people that come to mind as they were really your guiding lights, whether they were people in your life or in the saints or former mentors in Holy Cross? Who have been kind of the guiding lights to you along this path of understanding your vocation as a priest in Holy Cross along the way?
Well, I would say I could start with Father Moreau. But what I like about him is the whole idea that he had was that we would be a community, that there would be priests, brothers, and sisters involved, and that we would collaborate with laymen and women, and that we would go to where there was a need. And I think that's always, I always am thinking about that, that God calls us to be together. And so that's one of my inspirations. The next one is St. Andre Bessette, because I think his story shows us, don't think you know what a guy on the street corner is. He might be a saint, because Andre Bessette was an orphan and just didn't get much education, but had a powerful impact because of his love of God and God's love that he could share simply but profoundly, and then his devotion to St. Joseph. And so I like my patron saint a lot.
Yeah.
I get to do two of them with Joseph the Worker and St. Joseph.
Right.
But I think those are people that I pray to. I also love St. Ignatius of Loyola, and I read a lot. I read a lot about some of his theology. And Basil Moreau was deeply influenced by him. That's another thing that I think. And then I'm also, about 10 or 15 years ago, I went on a pilgrimage I didn't know anyone on it.
Yeah.
And we went to Rome and Assisi, and it was like 2.5 weeks, where we traveled around all the places that St. Francis of Assisi went. We had lectures in places, like going to the Church of San Damiano, and where Francis heard, "Rebuild my church." And at first he thought the physical building, and then he came to a further understanding. And his simplicity of life is another inspiration for me. And then, I like Maximilian Kolbe. I don't know if I could give up my life for a family, but that's an inspiration to me. And then on this campus, looking at the dome, like the picture on your wall of the dome, when you look at the dome, there's different shades on it. In the morning, with the sun shining brightly right in the front part of the dome, it's brilliant, shining out.
Yeah.
And then on the sides, there could be a little cloudiness or darkness, and it's a story of life. Just looking at Mary on the dome and her yes to all this. You can't walk around here and not be touched by the sacredness of the place.
Yeah.
The statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I remember one time there was a big storm here, and it was while students were around, and so Mary, or the Sacred Heart of Jesus, got knocked off that pedestal over there. And then I saw students going to it and getting up on the pedestal and putting their hands out like this.
Wow.
And so I think about that, and I tell people, we are called to do that, to be Jesus by our lives, and by growing in our faith and bringing Christ. And then there's the woman at the well, and I just think that one year for our staff, we had a retreat on campus where we went to various places, and we had reflections that someone had written about the log chapel or the dome, or places that were special to people. And there's just so many of them. And that's why I think that just being here and walking around and reflecting, the grotto, everything is special.
Yeah. It really is a special place filled with a lot of special people. As you've thought about in your life how you have tried to be Christ to others, that is our common calling. It happens in particular ways, but all of us are called to holiness in that way. What have been the most effective things for you to stay close to Christ, to be his presence in the world, to live your vocation?
Well, I think one of the things is at Corby we pray. We have morning prayer and evening prayer, but sometimes a lot of the people who live in halls can't quite make 7:30,
Right.
which is everyone understands that. But coming together in the evening to pray Vespers is really special, and I hate to miss it. So that's one of the things. Celebrating Mass. On Wednesdays, we have a community Mass. And so, in hearing different people preach, our brothers, hearing that is always inspirational. Seeing saints, looking at some of the people in Holy Cross and seeing a saint, like I think Monk Malloy is a really holy person.
Mm-hmm.
He lives a simple life, so simple as he didn't know how to type, so he's written all his books by pen, and his administrative assistant has to decipher what he wrote, and then it gets into a book. So Monk is someone I really admire a lot. Paul Doyle is another one that I really admire. He's so prayerful, and he is kind. He knows everyone in South Bend. When he was in the parish, he was in St. Joe and Holy Cross. And I've been at a restaurant with him, and someone will come up to him and say, "Do you remember me?" And he'll say, "Give me a clue, brother." Yeah. And the guy will say, "You married me." And then I see people like Austin Collins and Bob Dowd, and you think about how much the Pope's life changes, but when someone become monk, John Jenkins, Bob Dowd become president, their lives change a lot,
For sure.
and they have to sacrifice a lot. So seeing the sacrifices that people might make day in and day out. And I also had, for about 20 years, I was a steward of Corby Hall.
Uh-huh.
And so I was privy to how they would make their budgets out. And I was always inspired by how everyone is so aware of what we're gifted with and how they're not extravagant in any way. That's holiness too. Living their lives with dedication and hope. I think how we care for our students, and that's really an important thing, that helping them to achieve what God is calling them to be, and reminding them, to be able to remind them, in whether in the sacrament of reconciliation or in conversations, how they are created in the image and likeness of God, and treating them that way.
Yeah.
So those are a few, maybe you got more than...
No, that's great. Well, I was just going to say, you've described yourself in so many of those things. I mean, you've done so many of those things for many, many years, which is certainly the reason why I wanted to share your story on the podcast, and I'm excited to do so because you've touched so many lives here at Notre Dame and beyond, and through your priesthood, and you've been such a gift to us. So just thank you for all that you have done and continue to do here, and thanks for taking time to talk with me on the podcast today.
I'm happy to do it because I love the whole Notre Dame family, students and alumni.
Absolutely. All right, well, that concludes this episode of Everyday Holiness, a Faith ND podcast. As always, we invite you to like, subscribe, share the podcast with others, as well as to subscribe to our Faith ND Daily Gospel Reflection at faith.nd.edu/signup. There you'll receive notifications of future episodes of the podcast, as well as daily reflections from the Notre Dame family. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, you'll be in our prayers. God bless.